The rain had been tapping against the windows for hours, a steady rhythm that only made the house feel quieter, emptier. Claire lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, tracing invisible patterns in the darkness with her eyes. Sleep wasn't coming, hadn't come for nights if she was being honest. David's side of the bed was cold, the sheets undisturbed since he'd left for his latest business trip. She told herself she didn't mind, that she was used to the distance by now. But the truth was harder to ignore when the clock glowed 10:14 p.m. and her heart felt too awake. Another crack of thunder rolled overhead, and the lights flickered. Claire sighed and pushed herself up, wrapping a sweater around her shoulders as she padded down the hall. She thought about making tea, maybe reading until her eyelids grew heavy, but before she could open the cupboard, there was a knock at the front door. Not sharp or hurried, just a polite rhythmic rap that made her pause. She hesitated for a moment. This hour, in this weather. She peered through the narrow side window and saw Jake, her neighbor from 2 houses down, standing under the awning with a crooked smile. Beside him was a younger man she didn't immediately recognize. Broad-shouldered, boyish grin, hair damp from the rain. She cracked the door open, the cold air curling inside. "Evening," Jake said, lifting a bottle of red wine like a peace offering. "Our power just went out. Thought maybe we could come steal some light from you. Or better yet, you could come share some with us." Claire glanced at the stranger. Jake introduced him, Matt, his younger brother, in town for a few days. The thought of staying here alone, listening to the storm, felt suddenly unbearable. "Sure," she said before she could think too much about it. "Let me grab my sweater." Their place was warm, lit with candles scattered across tables and shelves, casting golden pools of light that made everything feel softer. Music hummed low from a small speaker, old jazz, the kind that made the air feel heavier in a pleasant way. Claire sank into the couch, the wine glass cool in her hand, while Matt teased Jake about his emergency stash of expensive bottles. "You know," Matt said, passing her a glass, "Jake makes you sound like this perfect neighbor. Always smiling, always polite. But I'm starting to think there's more to you than the polite wave from the driveway." His tone was playful, but his eyes lingered a second too long before he took a sip. Claire laughed it off, shaking her head. "Don't believe everything he says." Jake watched her over the rim of his own glass. His gaze steady, unreadable. Every so often, their fingers brushed when he passed the bottle to refill her drink. Small, harmless touches, but enough to send a quiet warmth through her. The wind rattled the windows, and then another knock came from the door. Jake raised an eyebrow, as if they weren't expecting anyone else. He opened it and Claire's breath caught. Ryan. She hadn't seen him in over 10 years, not since the messy blur of college days when late-night conversations and half-finished dreams had seemed like enough to build a future on. His hair was shorter now, his jaw sharper, but his eyes, those same dark, knowing eyes, were exactly as she remembered. "I heard there was wine," he said, stepping inside with the casual ease of someone who belonged there. His gaze found hers almost immediately, and for a moment the rest of the room faded. "Claire," he said. His voice low enough that Jake and Matt probably didn't hear. "Didn't think I'd see you again. Especially like this." She forced a smile, unsure what like this meant. Alone, barefoot in a neighbor's candlelit living room, cheeks warmed by wine and something she didn't want to name. The 4 of them talked, laughed, and let the storm outside become background noise. Ryan sat across from her, but every so often, she'd catch him watching her in a way that made her pulse skip. Matt leaned closer when telling a joke, his knee brushing hers under the table. Jake's hand found the back of the couch behind her, his arm just close enough to remind her of his presence. It wasn't loud, it wasn't wild, but something was shifting in the air, an unspoken current pulling her somewhere she wasn't sure she should go. When Ryan leaned forward to pour himself another glass, his hand lingered near hers, his voice dropping again. "You haven't changed much," he said. "Still have that look in your eyes. Like you're somewhere else entirely." She didn't answer right away because maybe he was right. Maybe a part of her had always been somewhere else, waiting for nights exactly like this, nights when the rules blurred and the rain made the world outside feel too far away to matter. The clock on Jake's wall ticked past 11, but for Claire, the night was just beginning. The storm showed no sign of letting up, and neither did the easy flow of conversation. Claire found herself leaning back into the couch, her shoulders loosening with each passing glass of wine. The flickering candlelight seemed to erase the sharp edges of the room, turning faces into soft silhouettes and words into something warmer than they had any right to be. She told herself it was just company she'd been missing, just harmless chatter on a sleepless night, but every glance, every subtle touch was rewriting that story in real time. Matt was the one who suggested a game. "Truth or dare?" he said with a grin, leaning forward like a kid with a secret. Claire laughed at first, shaking her head. "We're not teenagers," she said. But he persisted, claiming it would be more fun than sitting around, pretending not to notice the tension in the air. Jake smirked at that, and Ryan just sipped his wine without looking away from her. They started safe. Questions about favorite vacations, most embarrassing moments. Jake dared Matt to sing a ridiculous jingle from an old commercial, and Matt made Jake do 10 push-ups in the middle of the living room. The laughter came easy, and Claire almost forgot to keep her guard up. Almost. Then Matt's attention shifted. "Claire," he said, drawing out her name like a challenge. "Truth or dare?" She hesitated, glancing between the three men. "Truth," she said finally. "What's the most rebellious thing you've done since getting married?" The question hung in the air, heavier than the rain pounding against the windows. Her lips parted, then closed again. She could have lied. She could have dodged. But instead, she smiled faintly and said, "Probably agreeing to come here tonight." Matt's grin widened, and Jake let out a low chuckle. Ryan's gaze, however, sharpened just slightly, as if he was reading between the words. The dares started to lean less toward silly and more toward personal. Matt dared Jake to whisper something in Claire's ear, and she felt Jake's breath graze her skin as he murmured, "You look better in candlelight than you do in daylight." It wasn't what he said as much as how he said it, measured, certain, without a trace of hesitation. Ryan's turn came, and he dared Claire to tell him one thing she remembered about their last night together in college. She didn't meet his eyes when she answered, "That you didn't want to say goodbye." Her voice was softer than she intended, and she hated how it betrayed her. The game dissolved after that, but the closeness lingered. Jake shifted to sit beside her, his arm draped loosely along the back of the couch. Matt moved to the floor near her feet, one hand resting casually on the edge of the cushion. Ryan stayed across from her, but his focus never wavered, his eyes following the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She felt surrounded, not in a suffocating way, but in a way that made her pulse steady and race at the same time. Each man carried a different kind of gravity. Jake's quiet steadiness, Matt's youthful daring, Ryan's familiar danger. It was a triangle she knew she should step out of, but instead, she found herself leaning further in. The wine was making her warm, loosening the threads of her better judgment. The storm outside was relentless, its sound pressing against the windows like a drumbeat. She told herself she'd leave soon, that she'd go home before it became too much. But when Jake mentioned moving somewhere warmer, somewhere more comfortable, her answer caught in her throat. Matt stood first, offering a hand to help her up, his grip firm and lingering just long enough to register. Jake moved toward the hallway, glancing back as if to check she was following. Ryan stayed where he was, letting her walk past him. As she did, his fingers brushed hers, a ghost of contact that burned longer than it should have. Her feet carried her before her mind could stop them. The laughter, the wine, the flicker of old memories, the steady thrum of rain, it all felt like a tide pulling her forward. By the time she realized she hadn't protested, she was already halfway down the hall, the door to Jake's bedroom open and waiting. The hallway felt narrower than it had a moment ago, the flickering glow from a candle at the far end pulling her forward like a quiet invitation. Claire stepped inside Jake's room and was met with a dim, golden warmth. The storm outside was louder here, the rain hammering against the windows and thunder rolling so deeply it seemed to shake the floor beneath her. Jake was already inside, pulling an extra blanket from the bed and tossing it casually over the armchair. Matt followed, carrying the wine bottle, while Ryan lingered in the doorway for a moment before stepping in and closing it gently behind him. The faint click of the latch sounded far too final. The room smelled faintly of cedar and something darker. Aftershave, maybe. And the candlelight softened the hard lines of the furniture, making everything feel closer. Matt grinned, tossing the cork onto the dresser. "No reason we can't ride this blackout out in comfort," he said, pouring her another glass and pressing it into her hand. Claire wrapped her fingers around it, not so much for the drink as for something to hold on to. Her voice felt caught somewhere between a laugh and a question she couldn't bring herself to ask. Jake draped the blanket over her shoulders, his hand brushing her neck for just a second longer than necessary. They didn't talk about sitting down. Somehow it just happened. She ended up perched on the edge of the bed, Jake to her right, Matt leaning against the post at the foot, Ryan sitting low in the armchair across from her. She was aware of every movement in the room, the soft rustle of fabric, the way the candle flame bent and straightened, the shadows stretching across the walls. Ryan spoke first, his voice calm but with that same thread of curiosity he'd had all night. "You really haven't changed much," he said. "Except maybe you don't hide what you're thinking as well as you used to." She gave a faint smile, though it didn't feel steady. "Maybe I just don't care as much about hiding it anymore." Matt laughed softly, shaking his head. "Dangerous thing to say when you're surrounded like this." His tone was playful, but there was weight beneath it, and Jake's quiet glance toward her made her pulse jump. The wine tasted stronger this time, or maybe she was just noticing it more. She set the glass down, her hands empty now, and felt the air shift. They weren't closing in all at once. It was subtler than that. Jake leaning in to ask if she was warm enough. Matt brushing her knee with the back of his hand as he passed the bottle back to Jake. Ryan's gaze never dropping, steady and unblinking. It was too much. Too much awareness, too much closeness, too much of what she'd been missing without admitting it out loud. Her mind whispered that she should stand up, make some excuse, step back into the quiet of her own home. But her body didn't move. Jake's hand found her shoulder, light but grounding. Matt sat beside her, his laughter now quieter, more intimate. Ryan leaned forward in his chair, elbows resting on his knees, closing the space between them without even touching her. It wasn't a rush, wasn't chaos. It was a slow unraveling, the steady giving way of walls she'd kept up for years. The sound of the storm was still there, but now it felt far away, replaced by the rhythm of breathing and the occasional brush of contact that lingered just long enough to make her forget herself. When she let herself lean back, when she didn't stop Jake's hand from settling against the small of her back, when she didn't move away as Matt's fingers brushed hers, she knew she'd already crossed the line. It wasn't about one moment. It was about all of them, stacked on top of each other until the weight was too much to push away. She didn't know how much time had passed when the room finally went still. The candle burned lower, and the storm eased into a soft drizzle. Someone, she didn't even know who, adjusted the blanket around her shoulders before slipping quietly out. By the time she opened her eyes fully, she was alone. The morning light was pale and cold. She sat up slowly, her head clear but her thoughts tangled. The blanket still carried the faint mix of scents from the night before. She glanced down at her left hand, at the ring that felt heavier than it had yesterday. Downstairs, the coffee pot gurgled as it brewed. She stood at the kitchen window, mug in hand, watching the wet street shimmer under the weak sun. She told herself she'd find a way to tuck the night into some dark, unreachable corner of her memory. But as the last raindrop slid down the glass, she found herself whispering into the quiet. 3 was more than I could handle, but I let them in. And deep down, she knew she wasn't just talking about the storm.